Welcome back. The Office of Personnel Management says it'll consolidate more than 100 human resources management systems across government into one. OPM's named a new leader for the project, and the agency has a September 2027 deadline to finish. Scott Kupor is the director of OPM. Scott, welcome. It's great to see you again. I quote from the LinkedIn post of Donald Bauer. In late October, I laid out some uncomfortable truths, he writes, about federal HR consolidation because the scale of the challenge demands honesty. He goes on, OPM reached out. That suggested realism was being welcomed rather than resisted. He's now leading this effort for you.
That's right.
Tell me about the process behind that, where you and your team saw what he wrote and it led to conversations and now to him running this.
So it was actually a lot of fun, and I talked to Don about this when I had lunch with him when we were interviewing him. So he wrote this article, and I would say some of it was very, very, good. Others, what we realized was there were things that he didn't know that we had already anticipated that we were talking about. And so we had this long email exchange over the weekend between our teams, culminating in our decision to say, hey, look, let's reach out to him. At worst, we're going to learn something from this engagement. And it turns out in that process, we kind of each meandered our way to saying, hey, wouldn't it be great to work on this together? So I'm excited we did it. You and I were talking about this, kind of in the break room. I think the tendency sometimes is when people kind of, take a shot at something is probably to kind of, disassociate from them and say, hey, look, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. Our view is, look, we don't have all the answers. We need a lot of smart people around the table. This is a very ambitious project, and we thought Don could help us with that.
What do you anticipate the challenges being, and what do you anticipate being able to learn from other attempts to do this within single agencies and enterprise-wide across government in the past?
Yeah, so there's kind of a couple things. I mean, one is, look, just the scale of the project is big, right? We're literally talking about 2+ million federal civilian employees coming onto a single system. You mentioned in the lead-in, there's about 119 disparate systems today. So there's a massive just technical problem, which is how do we integrate all the data from those systems? How do we get everybody on a single instance? And then we've got to integrate into the payroll providers. So I would say the technical problem is a very big problem. The bigger challenge, which I learned from kind of talking to people about what hasn't worked in these other areas, is I would just refer to it as a governance problem, which is how do we make sure we get all the agencies involved and they feel like they are part of the process without also allowing this to become kind of, this monster of, 50 different heads basically, and every agency kind of pulling us in a different direction. So one of the things that, Don's going to help as well as the rest of the team is how do we make sure we distill the requirements in an appropriate way and come to some commonality so that we don't end up with this, as I said, this kind of 50-headed beast that will basically, make it impossible for us to achieve the kinds of savings and integration that we're looking for.
Who are the stakeholders that you are going to involve in that requirements process, and what are you going to ask them to contribute to get requirements that will result in you being able to build something?
Yeah, so the good news is, the requirements gathering we've been doing literally for almost the last 9 months now. So that includes basically all the major agencies. So, think of there are these 24, what they call CFO Act agencies, right, that are very large ones. We're interested in talking to their HR people, we're talking to their IT people, we're talking to their business operations people to understand it. So for the last 9 months, we've been gathering those requirements. That's what got distilled into the RFP that we put out, obviously, at the end of last year. Now, though, we've set up a whole governance structure going forward. So there is a technical governance board, there is a business process, governance board, and then there are kind of, different checks and balances across the ways. So I think we will do a very good job of kind of avoiding some of the pitfalls that we've seen in some of these major projects before.
One of those pitfalls, not peculiar necessarily to HR systems consolidation, but just broadly across government, is agencies will say, well, we do things that other agencies don't do.
Yes.
How do you break through that objection to get folks to yes?
Yeah, so everybody is a special snowflake, as you know, and that's true. By the way, not just in government, that's true everywhere. What I think has helped us so far is we've tried to basically make sure everyone understands the overall objective here, which is, obviously, look, there's certainly opportunities from a cost perspective to save money when you consolidate systems. But what's even more important is when you talk to the HR folks, what you realize is they spend an inordinate amount of time literally managing systems today, trying to find data that's useful to the business owners. We have today somewhere order of magnitude 46,000 HR professionals across all the agencies. And so what we found was the most persuasive argument was say, look, if we can figure out a way to make your jobs better, to actually improve the information dissemination that you can get, improve visibility for Congress, improve visibility for the White House. People tend to align around those objectives. So, look, I'm not sitting here telling you this is easy. It's a major process we're going through, but I think we've been able to convince people why this is good, not just for the government writ large, but also for each of them and their agencies in terms of the work they do every day on behalf of the American people.
I noted the September 2027 deadline.
Yes.
That you've established. What are the markers between now and then so that you know that you're on track to meet that deadline?
Yeah, so this is rolling out in several phases. So what we're about to kick off here, very shortly will be phase 1, and we've just kind of staged different agencies basically. So what you can basically see between now and that September 27 deadline will be 3 distinct phases, which will include 3 kind of groups of agencies all along. And some of those, we determined with people who were like most aggressive in terms of wanting to get out of the gate, and others had other integrations or things they were doing. So we tried not to play any favorites here, but just tried to be responsive to what the business needs were. So we will have good milestones along the way at each of these phases to understand if we're on track or off track.
I'm not recalling any particular HR project across government over the last 20 years that I've been paying attention, but in general, once you get people past the special snowflake phase and they get on board,
yes.
Okay, I need my piece of this to be customized to a particular direct. How are you going to avoid that one, Scott?
Well, look, we're just going to have the conversation. Look, customization is the death knell for these types of projects, right? And that's not to say that there aren't things that might ultimately be agency specific that has to be done, but what we've got to do, and this is why we started with what we call core HCM, which is not the entire enchilada, but basically kind of, a piece of, personnel records, self-service, health insurance information, all those things. We've got to keep that as pristine as possible. And then look, if it's required for an agency to truly do something unique, there is a governance process that we've set up for them to kind of present that to this board for us to discuss it, so that we're not going to allow splintering of the group. Basically, we're going to require kind of that the governance group as a whole sign off on some of these decisions.
It strikes me that the side benefit to that, or maybe the intended benefit to that, is an agency says, well, at least I have a chance to raise my hand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And say, I might need this special thing.
Yeah, no, look, this doesn't work if it's OPM dictating what people can do, right? More so than it works if every single agency can do their own thing. So, look, there's some give and take on both sides. There's no question about that. But I think we've set up a process where we've been building consensus, as I mentioned, really over the last 9 months. We've got, White House visibility on this. OMB, Russ Vought is very, very supportive of this. If, he kind of penned the memo that we sent to people. OMB's been very helpful to make sure that budgets have been set aside for this. It's gone to, all the way to Susie Wiles and that level of kind of governance within the White House. So I think we've done everything we can do, not to say that there won't be issues that'll come up along the way, but at least I think we have buy-in from folks in a way that everyone's kind of aligned around the same objective.
You touched on what my next question was going to be. What's the budget authority that's going to be, where's the money going to be set aside, not just at the OPM level, but at the agency level too? Yeah,
so one of the things we did, and the reason why it was so important for us to partner with OMB, was as part of the 26 budget process, which I guess just ended or beginning. I don't know. I'm new to this thing.
Depends where you are.
I don't know exactly where we are in the process. But basically, one of the things that OMB did was when we put out the memo that Russ and I signed, we said, hey, when you do your budget preparation, OMB is going to work with you to identify a line item associated with that. So think of it as basically a phased period where people have their current HR system expenses they're doing. We're going to slowly kind of wean them off that. At the time we start to bring that down, they will then obviously start paying for this new system. So as best as we can, we want those curves to cross in a way that is actually as efficient as possible. But we needed OMB's help in order to make sure that we had the budget set aside.
How did you come up with that 2027 deadline?
So funny story. I initially went, after we'd kind of gotten it all baked, the final step was to go talk to Susie Wiles, the president's chief of staff. And Russ Vought and I went in there together, and we showed her all the numbers and told her why we thought this was a great idea. And it was a great meeting. She's like, this is awesome. I love it. But we were pitching 3 years. And she said, 3 years is too long. How about 18 months? And so we went back to the team. We said, okay, can we rescrub this thing? Like, how realistic is this? And look, it's an aggressive target. There's no question about that. But my experience in all these things is the projects will fill whatever time you allot for them. So better to start with an aggressive target. If it turns out something major happens, it's always easier to potentially move the deadline back. But these deadlines, of course, never come in. So it's an aggressive target, but I think it's something that's very achievable.
All right. You and I, the last time we were together, talked about a couple other things that I want to follow up on when we come back. You can read more about the HR transformation on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. A big goodbye and a big hello for federal workforce data. More with OPM Director Scott Kupor when Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Welcome back. Data on the federal government's workforce is available now on a new website called Federal Workforce Data. The Office of Personnel Management has said goodbye to the FedScope site. OPM Director Scott Kupor is back to continue the conversation. What was the genesis of moving from FedScope to Federal Workforce Data? Was there something with FedScope that wasn't working right, or was there some other reason that you wanted to move forward?
I mean, the very simple answer is it was time. So we started FedScope, I believe, in the year 2000. And it was good for what had existed previously, which is quite frankly nothing. But the complaints we used to get about FedScope over time were the data was very lagged, so there's typically like a 9-month lag on data. The reporting interface was not easy to use, and so look, the overall utility of it just wasn't that great. And so we went to the team earlier this year, actually in March, and we said, look, this is, again, speaking of tight deadlines, we said, look, can we roll a new thing out that's based on modern technology, that's got a modern reporting interface that will basically end of life something that, quite frankly, had lived its natural course of life at this point in time. So that was really the genesis of it.
What did you have to do, if anything, with the data you were receiving from across government to be able to fit it into a new format and so on?
The main thing was, the technology on databases has changed tremendously over the years. So we had to create essentially what's called a data warehouse, right? Which is basically literally you're kind of, piling everything into a system and, being able to kind of normalize all the data so that every row and every table says, when I say, what does return to office mean? We know that people are reporting on that in the same way. So it was a lot of that and then building a reporting interface on top of it. But we were lucky, we were able to use commercial tools to do most of that with some tweaking, of course, on our own. But it was a great effort on the part of the team, and so far the early feedback has been very, very positive. So it really puts in the hands of the user the ability to kind of build their own tables, manipulate the data, and answer the questions that they want to answer. How many of the pieces were already in place, and how many of them did you have to collect from scratch? So this was really a complete redo, quite frankly. So certainly there was data sitting in the FedScope database, but the kind of, I'll get out of my technical league here very quickly. Maybe you know better than I, but kind of the structure of the database and how we did that, it was really kind of a start from scratch effort. So pretty much like we gutted the whole thing. Now, the other thing we did, which I'm really excited about is, which I think is also different from government typically, is we didn't go spend 12, 18, 24, 36 months trying to perfect this thing. We basically said, look, let's get something out there in 9 to 12 months. We kind of we're on the front end of that. And we basically recognize that, look, there may be some bugs in it, there may be some feature enhancements that have to happen, but one of the things I've learned from being in the technology world my whole life is until you get the software in people's hands, you really don't know what the feedback's going to be or how they're going to use it. So, sitting in your office and taking another 3, 6, 12 months is kind of a fool's errand, basically. It's way better to put it in the hands of the users, and that's what we did here. And I hope really that becomes more of a model for how government does software releases over time, is not try to boil the ocean, but get something out that's actually usable that then provides feedback for us to build off of. What's good feedback from the users, and who are the users that you want to appeal most to get that feedback from to help improve it? Yeah, so there's kind of, I would say, 3 core constituents of users. So, kind of the broad journalist reporting community relies on it for how they actually figure out, how many people are in the workforce, how many people have left, and all that good stuff. There's a number of kind of academicians and think tanks, again, who use it also to kind of look at trends over time. And then the other big area we get a lot of inquiries on is Congress itself, right? So they really want to understand kind of the data. And today, in the absence of having a good system, they would send us a letter and say, here's the 10 things I want to do. Now, I can take that letter and send it right back to them and say, here's your password to the site, go do it. So that's really kind of what we're looking at. You asked the question, what's good feedback? Look, any feedback is good feedback. So, it's always hard to get feedback, but as many of my managers always told me, it's a gift to receive feedback, and so we want it. And we just want it to be constructive. And so if there's things that you're missing or data that you think should be there or reporting interfaces don't exist, let us know. And as long as we feel like there's an opportunity for that to be generalizable across the user base, we're very happy to do that. Was there an opportunity here to present data to the end user that wasn't available through FedScope? Yeah, so we've kind of made it much more granular, so it's much easier to report by department. You can report kind of, different, age demographics and other things like that. So we wanted to add to the robustness and richness of the data as well. And again, I think there'll be new things over time probably that we want to track that this system was built very extensively, so that will allow us to actually add features over time. One of the things that I imagine people will try to track is the number of people that you're bringing in through Absolutely. The tech force.
You and I talked about that the last time you were on the program, and I've spoken to a number of chief information officers across government who are very optimistic about TechForce. What is the response that you've seen since you've introduced it? And how do you know that you're reaching the right kinds of people that you want to bring into government to work in technology?
Yeah, so the response so far has been great, both from the applicant pool as well as from the agencies, and it sounds like you've talked to some of those folks. I mean, pretty much every conversation to a T that I have with the agency CIOs is the faster you can get me qualified people on software development, on data science, on AI-related technologies, like we can put them to work. So a lot of these programs, as my understanding is, they fail sometimes because you don't have the demand side, right? You don't have the agencies ready to sign up. In this case, we did all that legwork up front, because the last thing I want to do is go out and try to recruit people and then find that we don't have a place for them. So I feel very good about that. On the application side, it's been going very well. In fact, the application deadline was Friday, and we saw a bunch of people kind of mid-application still kind of furiously working on it. So we decided to kind of extend it actually till February 2nd now to give people a little bit more time. You're also going to see us roll out some new job categories. So we're going to roll out product management, which is another job category that we found. So far it's been great. Now we have the heavy burden of going through thousands of applications and figuring out, how do we get them to the agencies to make sure that they can do the final vetting for folks. But it's been a fantastic experience so far.
In the how they get to agencies, one of the hang-ups for agencies in the past has been agency A wants to hire a software developer. They get applications. Agency B
Correct.
wants to also. Agency B doesn't know who's applied or who Agency A was not able to hire. Is that something you're going to be
It is, yeah. And this is a real problem across government. So one of the things we're doing with TechForce is I want it to be a proving ground for what we call shared certificates or pooled hiring, which we won't get too inside baseball. But basically this idea, which is what I want OPM to do broadly across job categories that exist in many agencies, is say, look, OPM should go be the marketing engine and drive top of funnel. So we should kind of go communicate what those jobs are. In this case, software developer, product manager. We will do initial vetting then. So in this case, in TechForce, everybody's going to go through a software code development test that we're using a third party for to validate their skills. Then we'll do kind of a structured resume review and some interviews. And then basically what we're going to do is we're going to present all the agencies, here's a vetted list, hopefully of thousands of people who've kind of met all the minimum qualifications. And then quite frankly, what I've said to the agencies is go knock yourself out and you guys compete against one another and convince this person why Department of War is better for them versus IRS versus CMS or other places. And so if we do this well, this will be a template for how we do lots of hiring across government. So you and I talked about this, but we hire a ton of project managers. We hire a ton of HR people. Every agency should not have to go and do exactly what you're saying, which is effectively reinvent the wheel every time. Instead, OPM can be that central focal point, and then we hand a shared certificate to all these different agencies. It's a way better applicant experience because the applicant doesn't need to go apply to 50 different places. And quite frankly, it's a way better experience for the agencies because what they should expect from OPM is a well-vetted list of candidates who meet all the minimum qualifications, and now the agency can kind of do the fit and finish interview as to, are they better in my agency or is their interests make more sense over here, basically.
We have about a minute left, but I can see a scenario where agencies on the inside say, we've really got to cut the hiring time down.
Yes.
If we're going to get the people rather than some other agency.
Yeah, that's exactly
is that
right.
Intended, or is
Absolutely.
that just a happenstance?
No, it's all intentional. So look, I'm a big believer that healthy competition is good for everybody, right? So in this case, the agency has to sell their vision of the world and why that applicant should live there. And yes, if agencies can be more efficient and drive the process faster, then they might be more competitive in getting the best applicants. I think that's good all around for the American people.
Scott, it's great to have you on the program again.
Thank you, Francis. Really appreciate it.
You can read more about the TechForce and FWD on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in a moment.